Have you ever wondered why sometimes the deepest wounds don't come from strangers, but from the very people we love the most? Not from someone on the street, not from a coworker, not from someone who dislikes you, but from the one you once held close, the one you thought would love you unconditionally. Let me share with you an image. One afternoon in a small town, in a kitchen still carrying the scent of fresh coffee, a mother gently offers her newly baked cake to her son, now a grown man. But instead of a smile, instead of gratitude, he looks at her with contempt. "You're always like this. You never do anything right." Just one sentence, but it cuts like a knife into the heart of a woman who has spent her life loving him. She stays silent, her hands slightly trembling, but she says nothing, and the son walks away, thinking he has just proven his independence. You see, there are moments so cruel, they take your breath away. And the irony is, they often happen under the roof we call home. But the real question is, why? Why would a son, who once fell asleep on his mother's chest, who once cried when she left the room, now speak to her with such disdain? Why can a love so pure turn into humiliation? This question has shattered countless families. And when we touch it, we go beyond personal conflict. We step into the darkest corners of the human soul. Pause for a moment and imagine this. A small child sits in a room, clinging to the sleeve of his mother. Every time the light outside fades, fear creeps in. To him, she is not just his mother. She is his entire world, his only safe place. But the child grows up. He becomes a young man hungry for freedom, desperate to prove his strength. And yet, every time he looks at her, a strange mix of emotions rises up. Love and anger, gratitude and a desire to escape, as if an invisible thread still binds him. One he cannot cut loose. Maybe you've seen this scene somewhere. Maybe you've lived through it in silence. An aging mother, her steps slow, her hands unsteady, and a son, instead of embracing her, turns away, or worse, speaks harshly. To an outsider, it seems cruel. But the truth is far more complex. Because that act is rarely just cruelty. It's the result of a psychological current flowing for decades. From the very first cry of a newborn, to the moment he becomes a man. Carl Jung once said, "What we fight in others is often what we cannot bear in ourselves, and nowhere is that more visible than in the relationship between a mother and her son." Let me paint another picture. A man in his 30s, successful, with a family of his own. But every time he visits his mother, he turns into a rebellious boy again. Arguments flare over the smallest things, the way she cooks, the way she asks questions, even a simple reminder. "Take care of your health." He snaps, "Stop it, Mom. I'm not a kid anymore." It may sound like a normal reaction, but behind those words is a silent storm, a fear of being dependent, a haunting feeling that he has never truly broken free from her arms. And instead of facing that fear, he chooses to humiliate. You see, this kind of cruelty is not just cold-heartedness. It is a twisted language of love that has never been set free. The son believes that by belittling his mother, he can prove his independence. But the truth is, in doing so, he only shows how tightly he's still bound. Let me share with you a small story. A friend once confided in me about his relationship with his mother. He said he often felt angry whenever she appeared weak or asked for little favors. Each time, he lashed out with harsh words. Then came the regret. But he couldn't understand why he acted that way. Until one day, he realized something. The reason he couldn't bear his mother's weakness was because it reminded him of his own. He feared that accepting her meant admitting that he was not as strong as the image he had built. And you know what? As he told me this, his eyes welled up. Because deep down, he was still that little boy who once clung to his mother in the dark. And now he was hurting the very person who once protected him. This is the tragedy. Love never truly disappears. It simply transforms into anger, into humiliation, into cold silence. Maybe you're thinking of someone right now, a mother, a son, or maybe even yourself. Maybe you see in this story a reflection of your own family. And that's why the question, why does a son humiliate his mother, is not just personal. It's a door into the shared unconscious of all of us. When we look at that cruelty, we don't just see an ungrateful son. We see a mirror held up to the human heart, a fear of dependence, a fear of weakness, a yearning for freedom, yet bound by the most primal love. And do you know what's most painful? Every time a son humiliates his mother, he doesn't just hurt her. He wounds the child within himself, the child who once loved her unconditionally. Every cruel word aimed at his mother is, in truth, a blade turned inward, cutting into his own heart. Let us pause here for now, but hold this question close to your heart. If love and dependence are the roots of this pain, then what truly lies behind the cruelty? And when a son strikes at his mother, who is he really fighting? Her? Or the fragile part of himself he cannot accept? When we speak of a mother, we often picture a specific person, her face, her voice, the hands that cared for us since childhood. But deep within the mind, the image of a mother is more than just an individual. It becomes an archetype, a symbol that lives in the unconscious of every human being. And it is this symbol that holds real power, because it reaches the very root of our existence. Imagine a newborn child, eyes unable to distinguish color, ears unable to separate sound. The world is vast and overwhelming, and the only thing that child clings to is the warmth of its mother's body. To that child, she is the universe, the breath of life, the beginning of all safety. She is not merely a woman, but a primal force, an embrace, a source of nourishment, a lullaby. In the language of psychology, this is the mother archetype, an image tied to survival, to the instinctive need for protection and care. But this archetype does not only carry gentle light, it also holds shadows, because complete protection comes with complete dependence. As the child grows, they want to explore, to run, to discover. Yet the mother's presence, though full of love, becomes an invisible tether. Safety transforms into a burden. Love turns into confinement. And the yearning for freedom gets suppressed within the very bond that once brought comfort. I remember hearing a man share about his childhood. He said, "My mother loved me so much, she never let me be alone. She followed me everywhere, always watched over me. When I was young, I thought it was love. But as I got older, it felt like a shadow weighing me down. I wanted to break free, yet I felt guilty. And whenever she appeared weak, I got angry. I didn't know why. Until I realized I wasn't just looking at my mother. I was facing the helpless child I used to be." His words struck me deeply, because they revealed a truth. Many sons, when they resist their mothers, are not fighting the woman herself, but the memory of their own dependence. Picture this. The mother becomes a mirror. When a son looks at her, he doesn't just see an aging woman. He sees the reflection of the child he once was, completely dependent, needing her to survive. That truth is painful, because it reminds him that deep down, he is not all-powerful, not invincible. And to hide that fact, he chooses to deny her, even diminish her. There are moments when this truth becomes most visible. When the mother grows weak, when her hands tremble, when she needs help. These should be moments of tenderness and gratitude. Yet many men respond with irritation, even cruelty. It is an unconscious revenge. They strike back for the years they felt powerless, for the times they could not live without this woman. The anger isn't aimed at the mother as she is today, but at the archetype, the symbol of both captivity and care. Another time, I heard a story from a successful man. He said every time his mother called, his chest felt heavy. Not because she said anything wrong, but because just hearing her voice triggered something inside him. A simple question like, "Have you eaten?" was enough to make him snap. It took him years to realize that her voice was tied to memories of childhood, when he couldn't take care of himself, when he depended entirely on her. And he hated that feeling, hated it so much, that hearing her voice made him want to push it away. You see, the mother archetype is both a source of life and a shadow. It carries two faces, one that shelters and one that binds. And when a son cannot reconcile the two, he often swings to extremes. He either idealizes his mother or brings her down. Both reactions come from the same root, the pain of confronting his own helplessness. Carl Jung once said, "What we do not resolve within ourselves, we will replay in our relationships." And the mother-son relationship is where some of our deepest inner conflicts take shape. When a son humiliates his mother, it is not just a clash in the present. It is a silent battle against the archetype within him, a fight against the memory that he was once weak, dependent, and small. The tragedy is, each cruel word doesn't free him, because when he attacks his mother, he is also attacking the child within. That child still lives inside him, still longs to be loved, but has been shoved into the shadows. So instead of breaking free, he falls deeper into contradiction. The more he denies it, the more it haunts him. Maybe you've seen a son raise his voice at his mother over something trivial. To outsiders, it may seem irrational, but to him, it is the moment the archetype rises. She is no longer just a physical mother. She becomes a symbol of the helplessness he once endured. And his harsh reaction is not against her, but against the memory, against the fragile part of himself. The painful truth is, while the son believes he's proving his independence, he's actually showing the opposite. Because only someone still bound needs to react so strongly. A truly free person doesn't need to put others down to feel strong. But when he humiliates his mother, it means the archetype still holds control. So the question becomes, how does a love so primal turn into resentment? How does a mother's gentle image become a mirror reflecting fury? The answer lies in the inability to name emotion. A child growing up under a suffocating embrace never learns how to say, "Mom, I love you, but I also need space." Instead, they stay silent and swallow their feelings. And in adulthood, that silence becomes a twisted language. Distance, shame, coldness. The mother archetype doesn't disappear. It only shifts shape, from a warm embrace to a heavy shadow. And the son, in his effort to escape, is pulled right back in. It becomes a cycle of love and anger, of needing and rejecting. This is the beginning of a tragedy we will explore further in the next parts. But hold on to this truth. When a son humiliates his mother, he is not just confronting a woman. He is wrestling with an archetype, a living symbol in his unconscious, something bound to his very existence. And that is why the cruelty not only wounds the mother, but also carves deep scars in his own soul. There is a strange paradox in the human soul. The most powerful emotions, when left without a way out, often transform into their opposite. Love, when it becomes suffocating, can turn into anger. Gratitude, when it becomes too heavy to bear, can turn into resentment. And the longing for closeness, when unmet in the right way, can become cruel distance. The relationship between a mother and her son is perhaps the clearest proof of this paradox. I remember a story told by a woman. She had an only son. When he was little, she gave him everything, every meal, every night's sleep, every saved coin. He was her whole world. But as he grew up, he began to pull away. Every time she tried to get closer, he responded with cold words. One time, she sat beside him and gently placed her hand on his shoulder. He pushed her away and shouted, "Leave me alone, Mom." In that moment, her heart shattered, and he turned away, hiding in his room, feeling both guilty and angry, but unable to stop himself. You see, that anger wasn't because she did something wrong. It came from love that had become too heavy for him to carry. He didn't know how to say, "Mom, I love you, but I need space." So the love twisted into anger, and anger became the only language he knew to resist the suffocating feeling. Jung once said that repressed feelings always return, but in a different form. When a son refuses to let himself feel gratitude, love, vulnerability, those emotions don't disappear. They come back, but disguised. They return as insults, as mockery, as coldness, like a reversed language. Instead of, "I need you, Mom," it becomes, "You're so weak." Instead of "I love you," it becomes, "I hate you." Imagine a little boy holding tightly onto his mother, crying when she leaves. Now imagine that same boy, years later, standing in front of his aging mother and throwing harsh words at her. The distance between those two moments isn't as vast as it seems. That child and that man are the same. And the insult, deep down, is a cry that's been strangled, twisted into rage. There's a psychological concept called projection. When we can't bear something in ourselves, we project it onto others. And in the mother-son relationship, this shows up clearly. A son may say his mother is too clingy, when in fact he has never learned to set boundaries. He may say she is too emotional, while he himself fears his own feelings. He may accuse her of being controlling, when he doesn't know how to express what he truly needs. The mother becomes a distorted mirror, reflecting the son's own shadows. And instead of facing himself, he chooses to destroy her image. A man once confessed to me, "Every time I see my mother weak, I lose it. I want to scream." But the truth is, it's not really her that makes me angry. It's the memory of me as a little boy. I was scared, helpless, totally dependent on her, and I hated that part of myself. So I attacked her, as if doing that would erase the past. But the past doesn't disappear. It only digs deeper and returns even stronger. The painful truth is, every time he insults his mother, he doesn't free himself. On the contrary, he binds himself tighter, because that behavior is not a sign of freedom, it's a sign of powerlessness. A truly independent man does not need to bring his mother down to prove he's grown. Only when we are still trapped in fear and shame do we need cruelty to assert ourselves. One evening, I saw a man in his 40s speak to his mother. She simply asked, "Have you eaten yet?" He looked at her, gave a dry laugh, and replied with sarcasm, "You always ask the dumbest things. I'm not a kid." Then he turned away, leaving the old woman sitting in silence. In that moment, I realized he wasn't answering his mother. He was answering a memory of a child who had once been smothered. When love loses its voice, it turns into destruction. When gratitude becomes too much to bear, it turns into hate. When closeness is repressed, it surfaces as distance. These are not new feelings. They are old ones, wearing new masks. And the tragedy for many mothers is they do not understand why their sons seem to have changed so much. The truth is, the son hasn't changed. He just no longer knows how to speak the primal truth within him. You were everything to me, but I also need to be myself. Oh, you might think of a relationship in your life where love and anger walk side by side, where the closer you want to be, the further you are pushed away. That is the very mechanism at work. And more often than not, it begins with the first relationship, the one with the mother. Jung once said, "The shadow we avoid is often where our greatest strength lies." Rejected love is the same. When we dare to name it, to admit the powerlessness we once felt, love returns in its original form, tender, grateful, but no longer binding. But when we keep denying it, it returns in its cruelest disguise: contempt, coldness, and scorn. Remember this: every son who humiliates his mother is deep down still the child who once loved her unconditionally. Every cruel word carries within it a strangled cry. "Mom, I still love you, but I don't know how to love you without losing myself." We'll pause this part here, but let the question linger. If love can become hate, can that hate be turned back into love? And how do we break this twisted cycle before it buries both mother and son? There are men who spend their entire lives thinking they have broken free from their mothers, when in truth, they never really left. They believe that through coldness, sarcasm, even humiliation, they have proven their maturity. But if we look closer, we'll see a bitter truth. This isn't a sign of freedom, but proof of a bond that was never resolved. I once witnessed a man in his 30s raise his voice at his mother, simply because she reminded him, "Don't forget to dress warmly." He snapped back, "I'm not a child anymore." At first glance, it sounds like a typical reaction. But if we dig deeper, we'll see that he's still trapped in the same old role as son resisting care, because he never learned how to receive love without feeling bound by it. Every reminder, no matter how small, awakens the memory of being dependent. And instead of smiling, he lashes out, as if trying to tear apart an invisible thread. The truth is, many men never outgrow their teenage rebellion. In youth, we need to rebel in order to find our identity. We need to say no to separate from our parents. But that rebellion, by nature, is meant to be a phase. It should end with a mature balance, the ability to love while standing on our own. The problem is, many sons never move past that phase. They get stuck in resistance, and the longer the rebellion lasts, the more it proves that they are still entangled. I remember a man once told me, "I can't stand it when my mother asks me for help. It feels like she's pulling me back into childhood. So I refuse. I get angry, but when I'm alone, I feel empty, like I hurt her and myself at the same time." That confession reveals something essential. Humiliation is not a sign of strength, but of unhealed weakness. And the mother, in many cases, is not entirely innocent either. She loves her son so much that she cannot let go. She keeps caring, keeps controlling, unconsciously holding on to the role of the all-powerful mother. She doesn't realize that by holding him too tightly, she helps fuel the bitterness of his resistance. Deep down, some mothers tie their entire self-worth to their role as a mother. So when the son grows up, they fear losing their purpose, and so they cling to him, even if it means silently accepting humiliation, because to them, It is better to be scorned than to be abandoned. And that belief is what keeps the cycle going. You see, this is no longer a one-sided story. It's a two-person dance, where both mother and son are trapped in unconscious patterns. The son, though screaming for freedom, has yet to learn how to stand as a grown man. The mother, though enduring hurtful words, is still holding on to the role that once gave her meaning. And so, the cycle continues. One attacks, the other endures, and both remain imprisoned. I once saw a heartbreaking moment. An elderly mother, her back hunched, slowly brought a bowl of rice to her son. He looked at her and said with disdain, "Stop doing that. You're always so clumsy and annoying." She paused, her eyes filled with quiet sadness, but said nothing. She sat down and silently ate. An outsider might ask, why doesn't she push back? Why does she tolerate it? But if you look deeper, you'll see she accepts the humiliation because she believes it is the only way to keep a connection, better to be looked down on than forgotten. And that belief ensures the cycle never ends. Jung once said that in every destructive relationship, both sides contribute to keeping the destruction alive. The son humiliates because he never truly detached from her shadow. The mother accepts the humiliation because she never found her value outside of being a mother. And so, they hold on to each other in a distorted bond, both loving and resenting, needing and breaking. You might imagine a pair of dancers stuck in a song that never ends. They no longer hear the music, only repeat the same worn-out steps. The son dances the step of attack. The mother dances the step of endure. This dance becomes their fate. But the truth is, it's not natural. It only continues because neither has the courage to stop, to change the rhythm. True maturity is not about rejecting the mother, nor clinging to her. It's about the ability to both love and separate. A mature son can say, "Mom, I love you, but I am my own person." A mature mother can say, "You are my flesh and blood, but you have your own life, and I respect that." When this doesn't happen, when the separation isn't completed, the unconscious cycle continues. The fear of growing up is not really about leaving the mother. It's the fear of facing oneself without a place to hide. As long as he clings to his mother, whether through love or cruelty, the son avoids confronting the primal loneliness of being human. He still has someone to blame, someone to resist, someone to burden with his unresolved emotions. But true maturity means no longer having anyone to blame, no one to rebel against, only yourself to face. And for many, that is more terrifying than anything else. You see, humiliation is not a severing. It is a distorted tether. It's like a wound that never heals, being scratched over and over until it bleeds. The son thinks he's free, but he's still trapped. The mother thinks she's connected, but in truth, she's erasing her own value. Both live in a loop with no exit. And the most frightening part is, this cycle rarely ends with one generation. It usually slides into the next, like an old song played again and again. Because the son, if unaware, will unconsciously reflect this same pattern onto his own children. And here, we step into another realm, the generational cycle, and the wound of self-worth, where humiliation becomes more than a story between two people. It becomes an invisible legacy, passed from one life to the next. If you pay close attention, you'll see that painful cycles in families rarely begin with just one person. They are often old stories playing on repeat, passed down from one generation to the next like a sad song that no one knows how to turn off. When a son humiliates his mother, we often assume it's a personal tragedy. But if we look deeper, we'll see shadows of the father, the grandparents, an entire family history quietly echoing in the background. I remember a conversation with a man in his 40s. He said, "When I was little, I used to see my father yelling at my mother, even mocking her in front of me. I hated him for it. I swore I'd never treat her like that. But now, I find myself doing the exact same thing. Sometimes I hear his voice coming out of my mouth. It terrifies me, but I don't know how to stop." His story isn't rare. A child who witnesses a father humiliating the mother, no matter how much they hate it, still unconsciously absorbs the pattern. And when they grow up, they repeat it like a script already written. The generational cycle operates in silence. A mother may have once been a girl who grew up in a home where love meant sacrifice. She learned that to be loved, she had to endure being disregarded. Then, as a mother, she carried that belief into the way she loved her son. She endured, she gave everything, unknowingly teaching him that love means crossing boundaries. And so, in the chaos of his emotions, the son learns to look down on the very source of love. The cycle continues. Here, another layer deepens the wound of pride. A son grows up carrying the memory that his mother saw every weakness in him, his tears, fears, and painful falls. As a man, he wants to present strength, to appear untouchable. But his mother is the living witness to his vulnerability, and that makes him feel ashamed. Instead of accepting that everyone was once fragile, he reacts by rejecting, even attacking, the witness to his past. A friend once told me, "I can hide everything from the world, but not from my mother. She's seen me at my worst, when I was small and helpless, and I hate her for that, even though she's done nothing wrong." He said it with a look of pain, as if confessing a sin no one could forgive. But the truth is, it's not just personal. It's a common psychological mechanism. When a man cannot face his own shadow, he pushes it outward onto his mother, forcing her to carry it for him. This is where the conflict between persona and shadow becomes clear. The persona is the mask we show the world. Strong, independent, needing no one. The shadow is what we hide. Fear, weakness, dependence. And the mother, unwillingly, becomes a living symbol of that shadow. Her mere presence, her simplest words, threaten to crack the mask. And the only defense the son knows is to humiliate, reject, and distance himself. You can see this clearly in everyday moments. When a mother gently asks, "Are you tired?" Instead of gratitude, he snaps, "Stop it. You're always so annoying." When she says, "I'm proud of you," he grows irritated. "Don't talk to me like I'm a kid." But really, in those moments, he's not speaking to her. He's battling his own shadow. The fear of being exposed, of being seen as weak. What makes this tragedy even more painful is realizing that no one in this story is truly at fault. The mother loves the only way she knows, but her love unknowingly plants the seeds of resistance. The son wants to grow up but chooses the wrong path, denial instead of acceptance. And so, what remains unhealed in one generation becomes a burden for the next. I remember another conversation, this time with a mother. She sighed and said, "I don't understand why my son looks down on me like this. I've given him everything. I've suffered my whole life so he could be happy. But now, he treats me with contempt." I asked, "Does this feel familiar? Has anyone ever treated you this way?" She was silent for a moment. Then tears fell. She remembered her father, a harsh man who belittled her as a child, and it was in that memory she learned that love comes with silent endurance. Without realizing it, she passed on the same distorted version of love she had once received. This is the power of generational cycles. What is left unresolved will return, often in an even harsher form. The son who humiliates his mother today may become the father whom his children one day fear, and the loop spins on, unless someone has the courage to break it. Imagine it, like a scar passed through blood. Each generation carries the mark of the one before, not just in DNA, but in unconscious habits, in the way they love, in how they respond to pain. A single insult doesn't stay in the moment. It echoes through memory and reemerges in the behavior of grandchildren. The frightening part is, when a son lashes out at his mother, he believes he's asserting himself. But in truth, he's only playing an old role. He hasn't escaped, he's just switched positions. Today, he's the attacker. Tomorrow, he might be the victim in the eyes of his own children. And this is the double tragedy. It is both a family loop and a wound of pride. One comes from history, the other from the inner self. They intertwine, binding mother and son in a knot that is hard to untangle. So the question is no longer just, why does a son humiliate his mother? But also, who will have the courage to end the cycle? Because if not, today's tragedy will become tomorrow's inheritance, and no one will escape it. From here, we step into even deeper territory, the fear of existence itself and the pressure of modern society, where humiliation becomes more than just a personal reaction. It becomes a man's way of coping with his fear of aging, illness, and death, the very things his mother so powerfully reflects. There is a truth few dare to face. In his mother's aging face, a son sees his own future. Her wrinkles are a reminder that he, too, will grow old. Her slow steps echo the coming weakness of his own body. And every time she needs his help, something stirs inside him, an unnamed fear, the fear of powerlessness, of sickness, of death. And instead of accepting this truth, many men choose to run. They humiliate their mothers, as if by lowering her, they can push away the shadow of their own mortality. I remember a friend telling me about the day his father passed away. His mother became more fragile than ever. She cried, leaned on him. But instead of comforting her, he felt anger. "It felt like she was pulling me into the grave with her," he said. That rage wasn't because of grief, but because her image in that moment, tearful and broken, forced him to confront his own helplessness. It reminded him that he, too, could not control fate, and to avoid that fear, he pushed her away, sometimes with cruel words. Psychology teaches us a familiar rule. What we hate most in others is often what we fear most within ourselves. When a son sees his mother weaken, he doesn't just see her. He sees himself in the future, a body that will fail, a spirit that may fade. And instead of responding with compassion, he attacks, as if he could fight time with humiliation. But the truth is, he only deepens the distance between himself and his mother, and between himself and the reality of being human. This existential fear is amplified by our culture. We live in a time where men are expected to be strong, independent, unshakable. The ideal man is painted as a warrior, never weak, never vulnerable. And in that picture, tenderness toward one's mother is often seen as unmanly. A man hugging his mother, crying beside her, or simply expressing gratitude, these things are too easily mocked. So many boys grow up believing that to be a man, they must separate from their mother's softness, even reject it. Imagine a teenage boy, 18 years old, when his friends tease him. "You still call your mom?" He laughs awkwardly, but from that day on, every call from her becomes a burden. He doesn't want to seem weak or immature, so the sweet, "Hi mom, it's me," slowly turns into clipped replies, then avoidance. As he grows older, that pattern becomes a wall. The boy becomes a man, but the shame of showing affection never leaves. Every time she appears fragile, it strikes that same nerve, triggering irritation, even cruelty. But modern society doesn't just pressure men to appear masculine. It also fuels emotional distance through a frantic pace of life and the rise of technology. Many sons live far from their mothers, consumed by work and their own families. Physical distance becomes emotional distance. A missed message, a forgotten call, a postponed visit, these small things cut deeply for an aging mother. And often, that quiet neglect hurts more than any harsh words. I once heard a mother say, "My son never yells at me, but he never replies either. I text him, 'Have you eaten?' No response. I call, no answer. I know he's busy, but to me, that silence is colder than any insult." Indeed, indifference can be more brutal than anger, because anger, at least, shows emotion, shows connection. Indifference is a blank wall where a mother hears only the echo of her own voice. Technology, which was meant to connect us, sometimes becomes a tool of separation. A son sees his mother's message on the screen but scrolls past it. He might say, "I'm busy," or "I'll call later." But deep down, that silence is avoidance, avoiding the truth that his mother is aging, growing weaker, and needing him. And that avoidance becomes a quiet kind of humiliation. This reveals something crucial. Humiliation isn't always loud. It can come through prolonged silence, indifferent glances, or the emotional distance disguised as a busy life. A mother, waiting in vain, feels forgotten, devalued, and the son, thinking he's moved on, finds himself caught in an invisible loop of guilt and disconnection. The fear of aging, illness, and death, combined with social pressures of masculinity and modern busyness, create a potent poison. They blind a man from seeing his mother with compassion. Instead, he sees in her a mirror of everything he wants to reject. And every time she falters, he strikes harder, as if destroying the mirror could erase what it reflects. But what's the truth? Every harsh word, every moment of silence, every cold look, none of them shatter that mirror. They only make the reflection sharper. Because the more he attacks, the more he distances himself, the clearer it becomes. He is still afraid, still hiding behind a mask. And here lies the real tragedy. Humiliation often erupts most violently when the mother needs love the most, when she is old, sick, or nearing death. These should be the moments of tenderness, of final love before parting. But for many men, it is when they become coldest, Because her weakness in those moments strikes the deepest fear in them. And instead of stepping into that fear with courage, they turn away. And from here, we go even deeper. When a man reacts so extremely, it's not just about the present. It's rooted in the mother-complex psychological bonds from childhood that were never untangled. It is where love and resistance exist side by side, morphing into painful opposites. It is here that we begin to understand. Breaking free doesn't come from rejecting the mother, nor from clinging to her. It comes from finally facing the fear and embracing the part of ourselves we've long tried to bury. If there is one thing most sons who carry deep anger toward their mothers have in common, it is the root disturbance known as the mother complex. Simply put, this is when the image of the mother is no longer just a childhood memory, but an invisible force that haunts a son throughout his life. It is like an underground current running through the soul, sometimes gentle, sometimes violent, but never still. The mother complex often shows up in two opposing extremes. On one end, the son is overly attached to his mother. He cannot separate, cannot truly live a life of his own. Every decision is shaped by her opinions, her expectations, her emotions. Outwardly, he may appear strong, but inwardly, he is still a boy who has never left her arms. And when the pressure to break free becomes unbearable, instead of separating in a healthy way, he chooses a distorted path: humiliation. Attack as if to shout, "I don't belong to you anymore." Yet, ironically, the more he attacks, the more he proves that the bond is still intact. On the other extreme, some sons spend their whole lives resisting anything that reminds them of their mother. They can't tolerate expressions of care, of affection, of maternal softness. To them, even a simple gesture of concern feels like a chain. They build a cold, distant facade, proud of their total independence. But underneath, the fear of dependence still remains. That's why they overreact, rejecting all tenderness as if it were a threat. I once heard a story from a man in New York. He grew up in a household where his mother smothered him with love. As an adult, he tried to break away with all his strength. He couldn't stand when anyone mentioned her, never spoke of her around friends. But one day, when she fell seriously ill and called him, he didn't answer. Later, when she passed, he broke down. He realized that despite all his denial, the image of his mother had always lived deep inside him. His extreme resistance was just the other face of unresolved attachment. The mother complex is like a warped mirror. Some sons see too much closeness in the reflection. Others see extreme distance. But no matter the form, the root is the same. The process of healthy separation was never completed. This process should have taken place during adolescence, when the child begins forming his own identity, learning how to love his mother without losing himself. But when that process is disrupted, when love comes with guilt, or when distance feels like abandonment, the mother's shadow lingers for life. One evening, I listened to a middle-aged man speak about his mother. He cried and said, "I've humiliated her more times than I can count, but the truth is, I never left her. I see her in my decisions, in my dreams, in how I treat my wife. The more I try to escape, the more present she becomes." His confession reminded me of a boat trying to leave the shore, but the anchor was never cut. The boat sails out, but is pulled back again and again until, eventually, the boat itself breaks. On the opposite side, I once met a man who told me he hated how his mother worried about him. When she asked how he was doing, he felt suffocated. When she tried to be close, he felt angry. As an adult, he moved out and cut ties completely. He thought that was freedom. But in his marriage, whenever his wife showed care, he reacted harshly as if she were trying to control him. In truth, he had never really broken free. He had simply redirected his resistance from mother to partner. Once again, the mother complex was at play. You see, both extremes, excessive attachment and extreme rejection, reveal the same truth. The relationship with the mother never found balance. The son never learned how to love while keeping healthy distance, how to receive without losing himself. He swings endlessly between the two poles, too close or too far. In both cases, love turns into a weapon, used either to attack or to escape. Deep down, the mother complex hides another tragedy. It doesn't just affect the mother-son relationship. It ripples outward into every other relationship, especially with women. A son who is not reconciled with the image of his mother often repeats the same pattern in love. Either he clings too tightly, attaching to a woman as if to his mother's shadow, or he withdraws, afraid of intimacy. In both cases, love never gets to breathe freely. Jung once said, "What is not made conscious will become fate." The mother complex, if unrecognized, becomes a man's destiny, a life spent repeating the same dance, just with a different partner, never changing the steps. He thinks he's living freely, but in truth, he is still dancing with his mother's shadow. What's heartbreaking is that in this dance, the mother often becomes a tragic figure. She may have spent her entire life raising her son, sacrificing everything for him. But when he grows up, what she receives is sometimes coldness, sometimes cruel words, and yet, instead of stepping back, many mothers endure it because they know no other way to stay close. That silent acceptance unintentionally feeds the mother complex and keeps the cycle spinning. You can picture the two poles of the mother complex like the ends of a magnet. One side pulls in, the other pushes away. But whether pulling or pushing, both prove that the magnetic force still exists. The truth is, only when that force loses its hold, when the son truly finds his own identity, can balance finally emerge. Only then does love stop being a chain and start becoming a natural flow. After all the tragedies, after the cycles that repeat again and again, the final question remains, is there a way out? Can the mother-son relationship, once so deeply tangled with love and resentment, ever return to balance? The answer is yes, but the path is not easy. It doesn't come from denial or continued endurance. It begins with the courage to face the darkness, the very parts of themselves that both mother and son have spent a lifetime avoiding. I remember a man once telling me during a long conversation, "My whole life, I tried to prove I was strong by pushing my mother away, by hurting her. But now, when I look into my son's eyes, I realize I'm just repeating my father's shadow, and if I don't stop, my son will do the same to me." In that moment, he broke down. For the first time in decades, he admitted that his cruelty wasn't strength, it was unhealed weakness. That is the first step, awareness. When a son understands that every insult is not independence, but a tear in his soul, he can begin the journey of healing. He must learn to accept that the fragile child he once was still lives within him, and that acknowledging this doesn't make him less of a man. It makes him more whole. For the mother, healing also requires courage. Many mothers have spent their lives believing that love equals sacrifice, that to keep their sons close, they must tolerate being disrespected. But the truth is the opposite. A mother who respects herself, who sets boundaries, teaches her son a more powerful lesson about love than any spoken advice ever could. One mother once said, "I realize that if I don't respect myself, my son will never learn how to respect women. So I started saying, you're not allowed to speak to me that way." And surprisingly, from the day she stood firm, her son began to change. Because he saw that his mother was no longer a shadow to throw pain at, but a person, independent and worthy of respect. Healing does not mean forgetting the past, nor does it mean denying the pain. It begins by looking directly at the wound and saying, "There were times I was cruel. There were times I endured too much, but I choose not to repeat it." Only then can the cycle be broken. A key part of this journey is learning to name the true emotions. The son must learn to say, "Mom, I feel suffocated," instead of lashing out in anger. The mother must learn to say, "That hurt me," instead of quietly enduring. These words may seem simple, but they are a new language, the language of honesty, replacing the twisted language of insults and silence. There is an image I always carry with me. A man, after years of distance, finally sits down with his mother. They are silent for a long time. Then he says, "I'm sorry for the things I said that hurt you." She begins to cry, but she doesn't say, "It's okay," like she always used to. She looks him in the eye and says, "I know, and I'm sorry too for holding on too long." In that moment, two generations looked into each other's darkness, and in that gaze, a new door opened, not of control, but of mutual respect. Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Every frustration we feel toward our mothers is really a reflection of something in ourselves we haven't yet accepted. And every pain a mother feels from her son is a reminder that she too must learn to love herself beyond the role of mother. When a son dares to face his own weakness, He no longer needs to humiliate his mother to feel powerful. He can be strong and gentle at the same time. And when a mother dares to separate love from blind sacrifice, she no longer needs to suffer in order to stay close. She can love and still hold her dignity. Imagine another possibility. Instead of humiliating, the son chooses to listen. Instead of suffering in silence, the mother chooses to set boundaries. In that space, love returns in its original form, pure, free, and no longer a chain. The son no longer sees his mother as a mirror of his helplessness, but as her own person with her own life. The mother no longer sees her son as her sole purpose, but as a grown man with the right to be free. And in that shift, both are set free. The road to healing doesn't promise to erase all wounds. The memories will remain. The pain will leave marks. But instead of letting them rule us, we learn from them. Instead of repeating, we learn to create a new path. And in that darkness, we find the light of true freedom. The mother-son bond is one of the most powerful and complex relationships in human life. It holds immense love, but also deep shadows. And for that very reason, it can become a training ground for growth, a space where we confront ourselves, where our shadows are transformed into strength. If you see yourself in this story, whether as the mother or the son, know this: change is possible. The wound doesn't have to become destiny. The cycle doesn't have to continue. All it takes is one moment of recognition, one moment of courage to speak the truth, and a new path will begin to unfold. And perhaps, after everything, the real question is no longer, why does a son humiliate his mother? But rather, do we have the courage to step out of the darkness, to turn pain into mature love? And you, the one listening, let that question stay in your heart. Because maybe, just maybe, in your closest relationships, you'll find the door to your deepest growth. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. If this message touched your heart, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you'll never miss the next journey we take together. Your support means the world to me.